What if loneliness isn't just an emotional state, but a molecular emergency writing itself directly into your DNA? What would happen or what is happening inside of our bodies when we feel lonely, when we feel that we don't fit, and when we feel that we are left out in a group or in a community, or we are socially isolated? There is a greeting that is in an energetic verbal tone that is easy to speak naturally, but it prioritizes community interaction. We are made for that. And it asks an engaging question to boost these properties that we have inside of us, and it will give you the opportunity to boost, to improve, to raise your emotional state. But there is some beliefs that have been for decades that we have been told that survival is about competition, and individual fitness and cutting edge neuroscience now and molecular genomics are revealing what is happening and what is the shocking truth of these interactions that we are not having, of this isolation that we many times are performing in ourselves. So your biology is fundamentally cooperative. You are made to have these interactions. You are made to have these relationships, and we learn much better by relating to other people. So your body doesn't expect you to survive alone. In this episode, I will dive deep into this biology of belonging, and I will bridge the gap between the hard science and the deep human connection, proving that leading with the heart is not a soft cliché, it is a physiological imperative. And here are two of the ideas that I will share during this episode, and I will break them down into little pieces so that you can understand how these discoveries of science are going to change the view of your health, of your relationships, of course, and of how you lead your life. The first one that I can share, and just a brief summary of it, is how the bioenergetic economy of the tribe, of your social engagement, which is also known as social baseline theory, is how your brain treats social connections as literal physical fuel, on par with glucose, on par with oxygen and with thermal energy. So the science is that when you are alone, your brain operates in a metabolically expensive, high effort and a state of threat and vigilance, raising your cortisol and exhausting your energy reserves. The proof that we have, it's the landmark studies with fMRI that analyze the patterns in our brain, and they have hand-holding studies showing that simply holding a loved one's hand instantly quietens and calms the brain's threat monitoring centers, which are the anterior insula and the hypothalamus. The connection literally is saving your body's energy, freeing up resources for cellular repair and immune defense. And that's why also loneliness is one of the hallmarks right now of being immunity deprived. The second idea that I will share, and I will explore more in the episode, is the social epigenetics and how loneliness rewrites literally your DNA. So you aren't just a reflection of what you eat or how you move, you are a genomic reflection of who you interact with. And this is I think one of the most powerful phrases that you can remember from this episode. We are reflecting with each other. That's why we have these mirror neurons, and that's why we have these pattern recognition systems. The science speaks that chronic social isolation triggers a genomic cellular alarm called the conserved transcriptional response to adversity, or CTRA. I have spoken about this in previous episodes, so you can watch a more thorough description in the previous ones. But this pathway upregulates the pro-inflammatory genes, driving cardiovascular disease and cognitive decline. Yes, you listen correctly. Cognitive decline is associated also with this chronic isolation, while shutting down also your innate antiviral defenses. How do we construct a shield? Well, I will reveal how eudaimonic well-being, happiness root in meaning. That's why I did some episodes of purpose, some episodes of this ancestral, also information that we can rescue from our ancestors, and how shared contribution and a conscious community acts as a literal molecular shield, completely blocking the inflammatory damage that we do with isolation. So let's start with this episode and let's explore all of these arenas of how I try to merge in this explanation of the biology of belonging. So how the social environment can sculpt and can model your cellular health and your human potential. There is a relational baseline. The human brain expects continuous access to social networks to conserve its own metabolic resources. By doing that, there is also a social cost associated with solitude. The social isolation is not a neutral psychological state, it is a highly active, metabolic, expensive threat response. And this has been inherited, and this is an evolutionary trait that also was designed to protect us from any other threats that we had in ancient times. So what happens right now? There is a paradigm shift now. We have now information that human physiology is fundamentally a cooperative system. We do not optimize ourselves or the way we move in our lives in isolation. We need this help, we need this connection, we need to mirror ourselves, we need to learn new patterns, and we need to learn how to work in a community. Now, what happens with the metabolic economy of the tribe? What is happening in the groups, in the different groups? Well, the human brain treats social resources as literal bioenergetic assets, interchangeably with glucose and oxygen, to lower the neural load. When you are in isolation, you start turning on many of these axes, many of these triggers that are going to release a cascade of hormones and a cascade of immune messengers that are going to help you to deal with the threat, although you don't have any threat, you are just isolated. So let's explore this information. Social proximity, you have a perceptual slant, and hills appear less steep when you have this connection. The metabolic dynamics lower baseline glucose demand. The thermoregulation, what is happening when we have this social proximity? Metabolic heat conservation is shared via the physical cues because we are having contact with another human being, of course. And the neural load, there is a threat monitoring outsourced to the network. So you can relax and you can feel that you are protected because you are with other people. Of course, this relates to the relationship that you have with these people. So when you are in isolation, what is happening? The perceptual slant is that physical environment is mapped as significantly more demanding. Why? Because you are alone. So you don't have anyone to help you if a threat is right about to make to perform certain pain in you, or if you might have an accident, so you are alone. Then what happens in the metabolism? Well, the metabolism starts elevating sugar seeking behavior to compensate for missing social assets. That's why people in isolation, and we understood this during the pandemic, started to gain a lot of weight because they were using food as a comfort because they were completely isolated from everyone. Now, in terms of the thermoregulation, it requires independent, highly expensive metabolic heat production. You are alone, so you have to warm up yourself. You don't have any contact with other people so that they can give you some of their heat, even though you are not touching them. Inside a house, just let's picture this when you have your house with 2 or 3 or 4 guests or family relatives or loved ones, your house feels a lot warmer than when you are alone. So this is just a matter of heat exchange and how we process heat in our bodies. Now, what happens in the brain? The neural load is that you have a continuous threat scanning to exhaust reserves because you feel that you might miss something. And that's why also we lived this during the pandemic. People were anxious to order things online and to buy stuff because they felt that they could be exhausting their reserves of food, or why not toilet paper? No, we watch that. So next, what is happening? The epigenetics of this connection, and this is really, really amazing what is happening. When we are in the chronic isolation, we initiate the uh, triggering of the conserved transcriptional response to adversity, or the CTRA sequence, and we rewrite our immune transcriptome. What is this in lay words or in easier words? This means that when you are isolated from other people, you are sending a signal to your genetic code to start creating a response to adversity. And this is an encoded message to your immune messengers and to your whole HPA axis to start activating the protocol for any kind of adversity. So you are beginning to be in hypervigilance. Now, what happens in steps? There is a sympathetic surge. So you start creating this awareness and this hypervigilance part of your body, and you perceive isolation as activating the beta adrenergic signaling. This is the first step that you can watch here in this part, in this first square of the images that we are showing. Next, there is an intracellular shift. The adrenergic signaling uncouples the exact structural formula for another factor, and don't pay attention to the names, they are just technical names, but I wanted you to understand this diagram. When we have these signals, they travel and they start activating through this molecular connection uh, this system called IKB. And they allow another factor that is called NFKB to translocate to the nucleus. This is two chemical signatures related through the structure, through the lock and key combination that they have in terms of the shape, to start the signals of genomic skewing. And these upregulate the pro-inflammatory cascades of ILB1 beta, IL-6, TNF alpha, and many other cytokines that are going to start creating this cascade of pro-inflammatory cytokines. And this is going to create inflammation. So, and they downregulate the type 1 interferon defense. So it will, by downregulating this system of interferon, which is the one that protects you for most viral infections, you will be left with a very low immunity. And also, it will downregulate your adaptive immunity. So this is, in translation, you are downregulating your immune system by becoming isolated. So that was the key factor that many people lived, and they are still living in this isolation. When we are in isolation, we turn on all of these signals, and that's why it is represented here in red in the sequence of your genome. In the other side, in blue and in green, we have the eudaimonic purpose. When you move into the, let's say, thriving system, when you start relating to other people, when you know that you have people that is around you and supporting you, and you create a network, a social, strong network, you create a molecular buffer. And the eudaimonic well-being, the meaning and the shared purpose, completely blocks the harmful genomic consequences of social isolation. And they act as a cellular shield against the CTRA profile, because the instructions now are overturned, and now you have a new instruction that is becoming through your perception that you are with your loved ones, that you are going to be helped, and that you can receive protection from other people as well. So what happens when we tune into the autonomic instrument that we have within ourselves? There are so many processes, so many pathways and signals and chemical assets that we have that we are not even aware of, and we couldn't even be aware of. So they are called that's why they are called autonomic, because they're automatic and they are just triggered or turned on due to the perception that you are having of the environment. So through the somatosensory safety network, which means that your body is sensing the environment, feeling that you are in a safe space, feeling that you are protected, there is this mammalian nervous system actively co-regulating one another via a continuous unconscious signaling. So this is the neuroperception. What it means, this translated, is that you use all your senses, of course, your sight, your taste, your smell, your touch, and all of the senses to feel regulated and to help your perception to feel that you are safe, that you are protected, that you are with other people. Now, what happens in this polyvagal ladder? And it is called like this because it is the vagus nerve and how all of the signals will travel through this ladder. So now, what happens with social engagement and growth? This is the ventral vagal state, and this is how we feel that we are protected. We then have a myelinated vagus, which is in the nucleus ambiguous, and this is just technical terms, but your brain now is receiving this signal. Now you start sending signals that you are safe, and you create a high HRV, which is the heart rate variability. That means that your heart is also creating coherence, and you have an active vagal brake that you use to decrease the cortisol release. Then it promotes connection, curiosity, and compassionate verbal prosody. This means that you are starting to connect with other people, starting to get curious about them, to ask questions, to feel that you are not alone in feeling these sensations. You start sharing things about your life, and you start sharing meaning of the things that matter in your life. And then what happens in the intermediate part? There is a sympathetic state. This is like the intermediate bony fish, let's say. So what happens here is the mobilization, the sympathetic chain of the ganglia. So in your brain, you start creating these processes that your sympathetic system is measuring through the signals of your brain. And this interpretation happens when we are alone and we start feeling tachycardia, we elevate adrenaline, we have muscle tension, and this promotes anxiety and narrow thread scanning. Why? Because we are alone. So we feel that many things can be a threat. Even getting, let's say, depleted in your food reserves or in your toilet paper, no? And I'm not making fun of that. I'm just trying to explain what happened during those states that we lived. So in the bottom of the ladder, we have the dorsal vagal state, and this is the oldest and the most primitive way of scanning for signals, and this is the reptilian brain also. And here we freeze. There is an immobilization. On myelinated vagus, the dorsal motor nucleus becomes frozen. So that's why many people froze during a threat, during an earthquake, during another kind of climate tragedy, or things that can happen when we are under very, very huge amounts of stress. We have this bradycardia, we have metabolic conservation, and many of our functions start lowering down, including the immune system, of course, and this promotes collapse, freeze, and dissociation. That's what this is how to explain the a traumatic experience and what is happening in these sensors of your vagus nerve ladder. So, what are the channels to entrain the system? There is an autonomic entrainment, and this starts from the insular cortex and aligns the heart rate variability between partners. So, when, let's say, and let's picture this, if we have an earthquake and we have someone beside us, we start getting synchronized with their own patterns. That's why there has to be one person that is more conscious and starts creating more tools to regulate their own emotions. Because if both people are scared or in this freeze state, nothing good will come out from that interaction. But if you have one person that is helping you to regulate your heart rate variability, you start adopting, reflecting, and mirroring the patterns of that person. Next comes the mirror neurons. So, and look at this phenomena that is happening. First is the heart. The heart synchronizes first with another person. Then comes the brain. So you can understand now why it's extremely important to regulate your emotions and to learn how to regulate your system. Now, in your mirror neurons, there is a premotor cortex that resonates with the observed emotional states. And that's why when we see people scared in the street, we become scared as well, because we have these mirror neurons and we are mirroring their behavior. So when we also have the third level, which is oxytocin dampening. And this means that now hormones are passing through. The physical touch suppresses corticotropin releasing hormone in the amygdala, and you feel that you are protected just by holding the hand of a person that is beside you during any kind of tragedy. And that's why we also, in movies or even in real events, when we are in a plane, let's say, and there is some turbulence, our first reaction is to hold their hand so that we can start passing these signals through the skin, and this oxytocin starts creating this suppression of the release of cortisol, and the system doesn't freeze and you stay regulated. Now, this is just, for me, this is just beautiful how the body starts creating these three levels of regulating ourselves, and how we can understand the whole different range of signals that is being deployed when we are in a simple thing that is becoming isolated. Now, the collective flow state, what is happening here? There is a hyperscanning that reveals that cohesive teams achieve interpersonal brain synchronization. So this means that when you are working with other people and merging these individual neural resources into a single distributed computational network, you empower the system and you start creating this connection and flow. That's why in, let's say, in games where there are teams, when they have a shared purpose and a clear group goal, the team starts performing a lot better. And one of the examples that I can relate right now with this soccer World Cup explosion of emotions is the team of Norway. This team is led by one of the most amazing players. I don't want to make mistakes with the name, but I think it's Haaland. And well, this soccer player is amazing because he's the one that pulled the Norway team into the picture of a World Cup, because we didn't even listen to the name of Norway before, and Norway hasn't been let's say a strong player in these World Cups. But now one person with a shared purpose, with a clear group goal, is making the system go into overdrive and making the team play into a flow state. So what happens here? When there is a very good leader like this person, like Tom Brady, like uh, other players that I can mention in other teams, they create this somatic and autonomic alignment, and they start creating interpersonal brain synchronization. So their brains, their waves, and everything that we can't see starts synchronizing, and they create a peak group flow state. And this is what happens in high achieving organizations or high performance organizations. They have learned this power to share the purpose and to communicate and to deliver clear group goals. What happens in these systems? There is a medial prefrontal cortex that is a rapid interbrain synchronization that occurs precisely between 90.3 and 13.9 seconds, and it serves as a quantitative index of converging motivational flow. Now, what happens in the right superior frontal gyrus, RSFG? There is an engage during precise sensory motor synchronization, playing music together, enabling superior motor stability, and this can also be a speech that the leader is creating to motivate their team mates. And the left middle temporal cortex exhibits a highly localized elevated beta gamma frequency power, and this coordinates the social feedback and motor execution. So what this means is that you start watching and replicating this coordination and motor execution of another player. And that's why with one good leader, you can create the explosion of a team. That's what happens when we synchronize our brains. Imagine if we do this in a community, and we start helping each other, and we start becoming more compassionate, not in the competing mode, but in the cooperative mode. We will boost the growth that each of us can have. Now, leading with the heart means applied somatics, means understanding the body, understanding the signals, understanding the heart, understanding the brain, understanding the powerful coherence and the explosion of mirroring these behaviors. So let's say that you want to foster a conscious community, which is not just a soft organizational strategy. This is one of the most powerful messages that you can deliver to your team. It is now a rigid biological imperative that we start learning how to execute this matrix. And I will give you these 3 steps so that you can apply them in your organization. Action 1, create synchronized extended exhales. The mechanism. This will facilitate acetylcholine release, directly activating the myelinated ventral vagal fibers via the cardiac branch. So by having these breathing techniques that are going to create synchronization between your teammates, you will create a group impact, and the heart rates and respiratory cycles will synchronize and will help other people that probably think that this is boring or this is difficult or they are too excited to synchronize their breath by just listening to the breath of other people, by closing their eyes and by staying in a relaxed state. They will establish a shared autonomic baseline of calm. Now, action 2. You have a compassionate, mutual eye contact. And this is when you open your eyes and you start creating the mirror neuron system. You coordinate the cranial nerves 7 and 10 and 9, and you engage the social engagement system, stabilizing pupil dilation. What is the group impact of doing this? It lowers threat neuroception. So you start lowering the cortisol levels. You instantly bridge the gap between isolated nervous system and a community supporting safe network. Action 3, you cultivate a eudaimonic purpose. So the mechanism of it is down-regulating the stress related to the gene FKBP5. I have talked about this gene before, so just watch the previous episodes. And this gene reverses the pro-inflammatory CTR skew, and it lowers the signals that there is a threat. What is the group impact? This acts as an epigenetic shield that completely buffers everyone's physiology against environmental adversity. And that's why when you are in a crisis or your company is suffering and you need to deliver something, this is one of the most powerful techniques that you can start using. Now, finally, we are arriving to the end, and leading with the heart means having conscious communities as a biological right now. We need to create these systems. How do we create it? By establishing the foundation of pillars. Pillar number one is prioritize psychological safety. The action is to establish a reliable social baseline within the organization, a supportive, safe network. What is the biological payoff? It eliminates the heavy metabolic cost of chronic threat vigilance and the sympathetic nervous system overdrive. In easier terms, it downregulates your stress, it downregulates the liberation of endorphins, hormones and chemical messages that are going to activate your sympathetic nervous system. Now, pillar number two, you integrate and you co-regulate the action. You practice extended exhale breathing and group vocal exercises, and you sustain mutual eye contact. By doing that, you directly engage the myelinated vagal brake, and you establish the collective nervous system of the team. You create the foundation to feel safe. You allow other people to regulate with your own breathing, with some humming exercises, and you can play, of course, relaxing music, but sustain the eye contact so that you can mirror the system. Pillar number three, cultivate a eudaimonic purpose. So the action is to align the daily group efforts with a shared, highly meaningful mission. This is what happens in a team when you have a good leader that is leading with the heart. What is the biological payoff? Epigenetically, you will be shielded with the physiology of everyone by downregulating the inflammatory gene expression and boosting antiviral defense. So this will protect you. This is really, really good for your immune system. Finally, I can just give you a message that I want you to remember after this episode. And the closing insight that I can give you is that the biology of belonging is our biochemistry, the neurology, and the social structures that they are not separate. Any of these, let's say, pillars, spheres, dimensions of our health, they blend, they combine, and they act as a team. Our body is always acting as a team. We don't learn the message, and we keep doing the things that are opposite to what our bodies are doing. So we are not separated domains. We are together. The biochemistry, the neurology, the immunology, the social structures, even the spirituality. So belonging is the foundational biological architecture of our human potential. And right now, I can't think of a better season to start understanding this message and to start delivering this message through our own communities. Thank you very much for listening and staying until the end. If you have any questions, if you have any feedback, please share it in the comments. Also, as usual, I encourage you to subscribe to the podcast, to start sharing the episodes, and of course, to assess my performance in these podcast episodes in the different platforms of Substack, of Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Thank you very much for your attention. Have a wonderful day, and I'll listen to you and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.